Over the years, we've seen the launch of countless electric city cars that have been designed to thrive in the cut and thrust world of the urban commute. However, almost all of those cars, including the first generation Mini Electric, the Aura 3 and the Peugeot E208, have had either terrible ranges, high starting prices, or both. But now we have this, the Dacia Spring, a small budget electric car that's proved to be so successful in Europe, Dacia has finally decided to bring it to the UK. However, it hasn't quite reached our shores yet, which is why we're here just outside of Bordeaux to find out if Dacia's first ever EV really is the cheap electric car we've all been waiting for. The Spring is a small electric car, which means it technically occupies the same class as rivals such as the Fiat 500e, the Citroën EC3 and the MG4. But this thing is actually shorter than a 3-door Mini Electric, and it undercuts all of those rivals significantly when it comes to price, a topic that we're going to dedicate quite a bit of time to later on in this video. Visually, the Spring is immediately recognizable as a Dacia because it shares a lot of the same design details as the new Duster. So it gets a similar grille design as well as this new superhero-esque Dacia logo. If you're wondering, it stands for DC. And then if you follow me around here, you'll see these handsome looking Y-shaped daytime running lights. The actual headlights are hidden down here. Then if you follow me around, you'll also spot this new camouflage design. Now, this isn't a case of Dacia trying to hide the lines of a pre-production car. This is what you will actually get on your Dacia Spring if you go for an extreme model. And the idea is that if you live in a city and you have a prang, instead of having to replace the whole bumper, you can just peel this vinyl off and replace it with a new one, which is quite a clever idea. Speaking of cost-conscious design measures, if you come around here, you'll see the wheel arches also have this black plastic cladding, again, cheap to replace, but also quite robust. And then down here, you have a handsome looking set of 15-inch wheels, but they're not alloy wheels. If you actually look behind this plastic cladding, you'll see that they're steel. Again, cheap to replace, and you don't have to worry too much if you hit a curb. Following me down here, you'll see we also have more vinyl. Again, easy to replace if it gets scratched. And Dacia's also made quite a big deal about these flush fitted door handles. Now, personally, I don't think these work with the roughy-tufty design of the rest of the car, but again, I'll leave it to you to decide if you like those. At the rear of the Spring, you'll find these Y-shaped tail lights, which mirror what you get on a Duster. But unique to the Spring is this camo, which is the same as we see on the front of the car, and this funky-looking black rear graphic, which I think helps to break up what is otherwise quite a bland-looking rear end. The interior of the old Dacia Spring that was on sale in Europe was a bit austere, but this car is a big improvement because it adopts Dacia's new design language. So you have this hexagonal steering wheel, these nice Y-shaped air vents, and lots of little bronze highlights on this range-topping model. The problem comes when you start to actually interact with the interior, because everywhere you touch, you'll find hard plastics. I'm talking the top of the dashboard, down here by the gear selector, and even the entire door card is made up of hard plastic. Even the steering wheel isn't wrapped in leather, it's just a textured, rubberized surface. So once you start to interact with your environment, you start to see where the cost cuttings have really come into play. Now, you could say the same again about the EC3, but at least that car has a nicer mix of materials, and on range topping models you do get a dashboard that is wrapped in a very attractive looking fabric. There is, however, a lot of storage space on offer for a car this small. So you have massive door pockets, for example. You have this big cubby carved into the dashboard, and you also have a big cubby here in front of the gear selector. There is actually 33 litres of storage space on offer in this small interior, interior. But if you want a bit more practicality, you can specify Dacia's optional U-clip system. And what that is effectively a mounting point for different utilities around the interior. There's one down here right in front of me, and to that you can add things like a cup holder, a flashlight, or a holder for your mobile phone. But I must flag that base Expression models don't look quite as premium as this top-of-the-line Extreme model. They get a more plainer color palette, and you don't even get a touchscreen infotainment system. You just get a little clip for your smartphone and a USB socket so that you can charge it. That's why it's so tempting to step up to range-topping Extreme like we have here, because you get this 10-inch infotainment system. Now, it's not exactly cutting edge, but it's very intuitive to use, and it has these tiles which each represent their own app, so again, very easy to navigate. Although it isn't the quickest system in the world, and the navigation app in particular is glacial. It takes ages to load up, and at one point today, it thought we were in a completely different part of France to where we actually were. But the good news is this does come as standard with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, so you can actually bypass Dacia's native system and just use the apps from your smartphone. I should also mention that the digital dials in this car are much nicer than the so-called head-up display that you get in the Citroën EC3. So overall, it's a pretty decent interior that's clearly been built to a budget. But let's see if things are as positive in the back. Now, it really is quite tight back here. As you can see, I've got effectively no legroom, and headroom isn't much better either. And that's because this really is a physically small car. For example, its wheelbase, which is the space between the front and rear wheels, is over 100 millimeters shorter than that of an EC3's, and it's over 200 millimeters shorter than an Aura 3. And while this thing is physically taller than an E208, it can't quite match the headroom on offer that you get in the boxier SUV-like EC3. But the biggest problem back here is not actually the room on offer, it's the fact that you don't get a middle seat. So a bit like a Honda Civic Type R, this is a strict four-seater. So you can fit a couple of kids back here, but it's not exactly been designed for school-run carpooling. The boot, however, is bigger than you might first expect, because at 308 litres, it's only a couple of litres down on the EC3, and it's actually bigger than what you get in a Mini Cooper electric, an E208 or an Aura 3. Just don't expect the boot to do anything particularly clever. There's no height adjustable boot floor. You get quite a lot of wheel arch intrusion, and there's not even a cheap plastic hook so that you can hang your groceries. Even the rear bench doesn't split in a 60-40 ratio, it just goes down as one. And there's no remote handles in the boot to drop the bench. But that actually isn't so much of an issue. Because this is such a small car, it's not a huge effort to lean inside, pull these tabs, and throw the bench down. But again, if you look inside, you'll see that not having an adjustable boot floor is a bit of a problem, because you end up with this massive step up to the rear bench, which could be an issue when loading in longer items. Another downside to not having an adjustable boot floor is there's no space for you to hide your charging cable, so they have to live in the boot with the rest of your kit. However, Dacia has thought of that, and for a small price, you can option a dedicated frunk that is designed specifically to take your charging cables. It's very like the one that we've recently seen on the Alfa Romeo Junior. So the Spring is basic but adequate, which is also reflected in the trim lineup. You only get two choices. Now, entry-level Expression models are available with either a 45 horsepower motor or a 65 horsepower motor, and they come with the bare essentials. So we're talking about front electric windows, cruise control, and manual air conditioning. You don't even get a touchscreen infotainment system, you just get a clip for your phone. If you go for the 45 horsepower car, you get 14-inch steel wheels, and if you go for the 65 horsepower car, you get 15-inch steel wheels. Now, if that all sounds a bit basic to you, don't worry. We would recommend that you step up to the Extreme model, which is the one we have here, because for not a whole lot more money, you do get a lot of nice luxuries, such as electric rear windows, electric mirrors, a 10-inch infotainment system with 2 USB charge ports in the front. And strangely, for a car at this price point, you also get something called vehicle to load, which means that you can effectively use your Spring as a big battery for appliances like your phone, a coffee machine, or a bike pump. Now, we've seen this technology on far more expensive EVs, but it's amazing that already it's managed to filter down into something so cheap. All Springs get a small 26.8 kilowatt hour battery, but you do get the option of 2 motors, one with 44 brake horsepower and one with 64 brake horsepower. Now, that is not a lot of power and means you'd be better off measuring the Spring's performance with an hourglass rather than a stopwatch. The official 0 to 62 mile an hour time for the less powerful car is over 19 seconds. And then if you go for the 64 brake horsepower car, that time drops down to 14 seconds, which is more reasonable, but it's still nowhere near as quick as the EC3 that does the same run in 10.3 seconds. However, to be fair, the 64 brake horsepower car does feel sprightlier than those on-paper numbers suggest. It actually gets up to 40 mile an hour quite quickly. It's only when you're over 40 mile an hour that acceleration really starts to tail off as you hone in on its 78 mile an hour top speed. And if you want to sit at motorway speeds, you really do have to work the motor pretty hard, which has a drastic impact on range. And that's not good when your official range is only 140 miles to begin with. That's about 50 miles less than an EC3 and about 75 miles less than an E208. However, there is a benefit to having such a small electric battery, and that's weight. This is the only electric car on sale in the UK that weighs less than a ton, and that has a positive impact on efficiency. On a gentle drive around the city, you should easily be seeing over 4 miles per kilowatt hour. So if you do live and work in an urban environment, this thing should be pretty cheap to keep topped up. Another benefit to having a small 26.8 kilowatt hour battery is that it should, in theory, not take very long to charge it. The only issue is this thing has a maximum charging rate of 30 kilowatts, which is pretty much the slowest charging rate we've ever tested. And it also means that this car will take 45 minutes to charge from 20 to 80%. In comparison, a Citroën EC3 can charge at 100 kilowatts, which means that same charge from 20 to 80% will take just 25 minutes. That said, this is a city car, so we expect most people will charge it at home. And if you plug it in using a 3-pin plug, you'll find that you'll get a 20 to 100% charge in just over 11 hours, which is perfectly acceptable. And if you have a 7 kilowatt wall box, you'll find that it'll do the same charge in just over 4 hours. Now, Dacia has always had a reputation for being cheaper and more affordable than most manufacturers, but this has led Dacia over the years to not fit the latest safety tech to their cars. Things like automatic emergency braking with pedestrian protection. And what that means is that cars like the Jogger and the Sandero haven't got the NCAP scores that some people think that they deserve. Now, the good news is that the Spring does get the latest version of automatic emergency braking. It gets lane keep assistance, and it also gets traffic sign detection. However, Dacia has said that they will not be re-NCAPing this car. So officially, this has a 1-star safety rating, which is pretty abysmal in this day and age. However, you can look at that score in one of two ways. The first way would be to say, well, this new car is certainly safer than, let's say, a second-hand 10-year-old Renault Clio. Or you could view it another way and say, actually, it would be worth spending the extra money on something like a Citroën EC3 or a Peugeot E208, just for that added peace of mind. In terms of driving dynamics though, things are a little less rosy. The steering has been made very light for the city, and I have to admit that makes this car very easy to drive around tight city streets. However, when you get out onto a country road like this, it fails to build any weight. And combined with the fact that the steering rack itself is very slow, what you end up with is a setup that feels incredibly vague. And again, that just robs you of some confidence. I've actually been 50 pence piecing my way around a lot of corners because I can't quite work out how much steering input to put in to get around the corner smoothly. There's also loads of body lean and very little grip, although that latter complaint could be down to the fact that this press car is shod with Ling-Long tyres. In terms of refinement, the ride quality is actually surprisingly good. And I think that's because you've got a very soft suspension setup, but you've also got tyres with a thick sidewall. So this car does a really decent job of rounding off really bad abrasions like potholes and expansion joints. Again, it's only when you get out onto a country road and you're dealing with quite severe crests and compressions that the car starts to kind of pogo its way down the road. There's not a lot of body control, and I think that's simply down to the cheapness of the suspension. You also have to deal with the fact that there's a lot of wind and road noise once you get beyond 50 miles an hour, which serves to remind you that this car is not really designed for long distances. Speaking of which, here are two bad and two good things about the Dacia Spring. As we mentioned earlier, the maximum charge rate of this car is pretty slow, and that's a problem when you have a limited range to play with, because let's say you're getting just over 100 miles to a charge on the motorway from this thing. Now, having to stop for 20 minutes, it's not great, it's an inconvenience, but you can get back on your way pretty quickly. But having to wait 45 minutes for this thing to get back up to 80% ultimately rules it out as a long distance companion, unless that is you have the absolute patience of a saint. For this latest version of the Dacia Spring that's coming to the UK, Dacia decided to fit a new regen mode, and it's pretty simple. You just pull back on the gear selector to pop it into B mode, and if you take your foot off the brake, the car slows down. The only thing is, it doesn't slow down very much. The regen effect is very light, and it won't bring you to a complete stop, which makes me think, if you're not going to implement it properly, why do it at all? One thing I love about the Dacia Spring is all the physical buttons. So if you look down here, you'll see that I have rotary dials for the air conditioning. Now that's much easier to use than diving into a touchscreen to change the air conditioning on the move. Arguably, the best thing about the Dacia Spring is something we've not even spoken about yet, and that's its pricing. Because this car starts at just $14,995, and the range topper is only $16,995, which is incredible value for an electric car. Rivals such as the Aura 3 start at north of £30,000, making them twice the money of an entry-level one of these. And as I'm sure you've already guessed, that makes this car the cheapest EV currently on sale in the UK, if you discount rivals like the quadricycle Citroën Ami. This thing is also significantly cheaper than its closest real rival, the Citroën EC3, which starts at around £21,000. If you have your heart set on a new compact electric car and you live in a city, then the Spring is a bit of a game changer, because if you're only ever going to do short journeys, you want something fairly practical, and you're only ever going to charge at home, then it makes a lot of sense. We can certainly see why it was the third best-selling privately bought car in Europe last year. But if you live anywhere else in the country, then the Spring's limited range and slow charging speeds will stop you using it for longer journeys. And that's where rivals like the Citroën EC3 look like a very tempting alternative. Because while that car is a bit more expensive to buy, you could use it as your only car. So Dacia hasn't really introduced the small budget electric car revolution that perhaps we were hoping for, but if the Spring fits into your specific lifestyle, then it is well worth considering. If you liked this video and you'd like to learn more about the Dacia Spring, make sure to visit whatcar.com, where you can read our full written review. The link is over here. And if you'd like to watch more What Car YouTube videos, make sure to head over here.